Welcome to the Rules Committee. We're here to meet on H.R. 4402, and I would invite Mr. Markey and Chairman Hastings up to the podium. As the chairman would say if he was here after his welcome, it's just a look into the future. Well, see, that's all we have here. It looks grim. We'd welcome your testimony, and everything you have be welcome to be submitted for the record. Mr. Hastings.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Acting Chairman.
Thank you.
I appreciate that for holding this hearing on H.R. 4402, the National Strategic and Critical Minerals Production Act. This is a bipartisan plan that allows us, our country, to more officially develop our strategic and critical minerals from federal lands. Those minerals are very important to job creation, economic competitiveness, and our national security. We import right now nearly 100% of rare earth elements that are critical to our manufacturing sector, and a big part of that comes from China. This bill, if enacted, would end that dependence by cutting red tape and adding certainty to the process to those that want to make the investments to get this rare earth and other minerals from the ground. Without that, the rare earth is a big part, as I mentioned, of our defense and our medical industry. This is very similar to other bills that we have brought before the committee dealing with energy production, whether you're talking about offshore or onshore. It puts certainty into the process. Now we're focusing on the minerals that are so important to our economy on federal lands, and this bill brings certainty to that process. So I thank you for your consideration, and I'd be more than happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to testify. While an outside observer might think that the Natural Resources Committee has advanced a number of energy-related bills to the House floor, in reality, the committee has passed largely the same legislation over and over again. Only the name of the industry reaping the windfall has changed. The majority has pushed legislation to benefit wealthy oil companies drilling in federal waters without including safety reforms in the wake of the BP disaster. The majority approved a land deal for a multinational mining company without protecting Native American sacred sites or local water quality. The majority recently approved a lands package that will allow a Native Alaskan corporation to clear-cut old-growth timber without sufficient protections for water quality or salmon runs. Those making a profit from grazing their livestock on public lands have been rewarded with longer contracts and weakened protections for water quality. More recently, the majority pushed through legislation granting the same windfall to onshore energy companies as had been extended to offshore companies, again without sufficient safety improvements. These bills are not a jobs plan. The largest oil companies are actually shrinking their U.S. workforces. These bills are not an all-of-the-above plan. They ignore sectors like renewable energy that have been growing quickly. And these bills will not benefit the American consumer. We have already increased domestic energy production, and it has failed to insulate us from price fluctuations. President Obama now has the United States at an 18-year high for oil production in the United States of America. We have to go all the way back to 1993 to find the year where more oil was being produced than President Obama is producing in our country this year. These bills are simply giveaways for energy companies disguised in the rhetoric of jobs and gas prices. H.R. 4402 is more of the same, just with mining inserted in the blank where the majority has inserted drilling or timber before. Under the guise of extracting strategic and critical materials, the bill is so broadly drafted as to potentially include minerals that are clearly not in short supply or subject to supply disruptions such as sand and gravel and potentially even coal. The Natural Resources Committee has previously reported out bipartisan legislation in a unanimous vote, H.R. 2011, that would improve our understanding of critical and strategic mineral deposits and aid the development of them. That legislation has the support of the National Mining Association, yet the majority has refused to bring it to the floor for nearly a year even though it would garner unanimous bipartisan support on the House floor. Instead, we are considering H.R. 4402, which is a wolf in sheep's clothing. It is yet another step in the majority's effort to leave no stone, or perhaps in this case no sand or gravel or coal, unturned in searching for ways to maximize industry profit at the expense of the American people. And just as with previous efforts, this bill misses the much larger and much more significant point. Thanks to the mining law of 1872, the American taxpayer has been allowing mining for gold and silver and uranium and other hard rock minerals on public lands for 140 years without receiving a proper payment. This legislation seeks to increase mining companies' profits while doing absolutely nothing to end this free mining that was put in place by Ulysses S. Grant. I have filed an amendment that would end this by imposing a royalty of 12.5% on these minerals and fund the cleanup of abandoned mines, allowing the wealthy multinational corporations to maximize their profits by extracting our natural resources more quickly and with fewer safety and environmental safeguards is not a jobs plan. It is not an energy plan. It is a plan to abdicate our responsibility as stewards of our natural resources on behalf of the American people. In the Bible, Esau sells his birthright for a mess of pottage. This string of majority bills would have us sell our birthright, and all we will have left is a mess. I would urge this committee and this House to shelve H.R. 4402 in favor of bills that will really create jobs and protect and preserve our American birthright. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
In my short 18 months here, Mr. Markey, that is the first Esau reference that we've had here at the Rules Committee. I appreciate that. Mr. Nugent.
How does that currently affect the United States as it relates to mining of rare earths?
Well, the short answer is rare earth, and Mr. Amadei, the sponsor of this legislation, probably, I know he knows this much better than I do, but rare earths minerals are used in a number of manufacturing processes for critical industries. High-tech industry, for example, is a big user of these rare earths. And if you talk about high-tech, you're obviously talking about national security because that overlaps. And the idea behind this legislation is to make us less dependent on foreign sources for these type of material. And keep in mind, this legislation is aimed at federal lands. Federal lands, unless otherwise designated, were designed to be used for multiple purposes. That includes commercial activity. But because of the red tape that has evolved over time, it has become virtually impossible for those that want to make the investment, and by the way, a large part of these are small businessmen, to make the investment to extract these minerals, and these are all good-paying jobs. So this, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is designed to bring some certainty to the process for a very critical component of our economy, and namely the rare earths. I might add, too, if I may, Mr. Nugent, one other thing. All of the pieces of legislation that Mr. Markey referenced earlier passed out of committee not only with bipartisan support, but passed out of the House with bipartisan support. So there is a broad bipartisan effort behind this, and I suspect that will be the same with this bill also.
You know, it indicates in here that currently it takes up to 10 years to get a permit. Has that always been the case?
Again, Mr. Amadei can answer that better, coming from a state that is 95%, I think, owned by the federal government, of which a large part of that is mining. It is, and what this bill seeks to do is to put that process at 30 months. Now, it doesn't say it has to be an affirmative action, make a decision within 30 months. I think that makes a great deal of sense, because if you're talking about something over a 10-year period, how do you know what the markets will be, for example? Right. And so some certainty in the process, as I mentioned, I think is important, and that's the scope of this legislation.
I have no further.
Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, thank you. You know, there's a concern that this bill is not about rare earth elements or any special category of minerals, that it's simply a bill to gut governmental review for almost all types of mining, that this would even apply to sand, gravel, and coal. And, you know, there's also a concern that this bill is nothing more than an additional giveaway to an industry that already makes billions of dollars from mining without paying royalties on most of it. I noticed that in committee, Representative Tonko proposed an amendment to narrow the bill to rare earth elements and other critical and strategic minerals, and Republicans rejected it. I'm just curious, why would you reject that kind of amendment?
Well, because it didn't have enough votes. That's why it was rejected.
I get that, but I'm
okay.
just trying to think of the rationale behind voting against something that seemed reasonable to me.
Well, let me respond. Again, Mr. Amadei can expound upon this when he comes up here. But I think it can be argued, we talk about a form of minerals as being rare earth. And there's no question that they are rare. But to say that they're not, to say some minerals aren't critical to our well-being, I think defies logic. For example, starting in the 1950s, we built an interstate system for national security purposes. And by the way, one of the criteria for a mineral to be important is national security issues. The interstate was built with sand and gravel. Obviously, that was very important, and the logic behind that was for national security issues. So while that may follow into that category, it certainly is an element that we should have for our security. So I don't make any bones about that. And again, Mr. Amadei can elaborate on that.
Anyway, it seems to me that, again, this is another attempt to try to circumvent, I think, reasonable review, and again, it's another bill to benefit an industry that is already making billions of dollars and not paying royalties on most of it. So, you know, I agree with Mr. It won't come as a surprise to you. I agree with Mr. Markey. I think it makes a lot more sense than you do on this issue.
If you're asking me, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So, anyway, thank you.
Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no questions.
Mr. Hastings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a question. I would like unanimous consent to submit the Statement of Administration policy coming from the Executive Office of the President, Office of Management and Budget.
Without objection, that will appear in the record. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Polis.
No.
Mr. Webster. All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony. There. Mr. Amadei, if you would come up to the table. Ms. Bonamici, we'll give Mr. Amadei the table alone, and then we'll have you up alone for the last panel. Mr. Amadei, any comments, any prepared statements you have, we'd be happy to accept for the record, and welcome your comments.
Mr. Ranking Member, I appreciate your courtesy in allowing me to appear before you here today. If it's acceptable to you, I would like to just make a brief statement and then perhaps respond to some of the questions. First and foremost, I would submit to you that H.R. 4402 is about setting maximum time limits with respect to minerals, land use, extraction decisions on public lands. The 2 points are these: maximum time limits for decision on public land. They don't give away anything. They don't require a maximum time limit for a yes answer or a no answer. They just require an answer within a certain amount of time. An interesting point in all of that is this. Testimony in the subcommittee indicated that the present administration had reduced times to make decisions on that. If you accept that decision, and I'm not suggesting you should or you shouldn't, the time was indicated at 200 and some odd days. It said it was a significant reduction from the previous administration. The 30 months provided in this bill is a longer time frame for those executive branch agencies to make a decision than what has been supposedly achieved by the present administration in those decisions, I want to remind you, on public land. So when we talk about, is this a giveaway, is somebody getting something or whatever, it's like they're getting a decision within a maximum time frame, which is 30 months. There was a question earlier about 10 years, and if that was always the case, I would submit to you that any private industry business decision which has no absolute time frame for it to be made in, much less that it will be made, is something which discourages people from thinking about doing that with private capital. That's why this. Not you must say yes, but you must give them an answer. There are two other elements to the time limit. There's a 30-day time limit for Federal Register publication, so that can't drag out. That is one of the things that we have experienced that says, hey, this can drag on and on. Time limits for filing a court case. Doesn't tell you you can or you can't or tell the court what to do necessarily, but says if you're going to sue because you don't like the decision, whether it was a yes or a no decision, you've got to do that in 60 days. Why is that? Predictability in terms of what you're looking at time frames. And why am I telling you all this? Because basically in the last 10 years, 20% of all minerals, exploration dollars spent in the world were spent in the United States. Now it's about 8%. Why is that? I would submit to you that the reason is because you don't know if you're going to get a decision and when you're going to get it. Not that you're entitled to a yes decision, but a decision. So that's the purpose of the bill, is to say, sit down, pre-coordinate with people, figure out what time frame it's going to take, and then stick to that time frame. And if the answer is no, and you don't like it on either side, then you've got 60 days to file your lawsuit. And when you talk about rare earths, I'll tell you why the reason rare earths are important. Right now, the United States imports 100% of its rare earths. This bill won't make it more economical or less economical to potentially start mining rare earths in the United States again, but it will make it on public lands. I want to keep reminding you of that, because when I hear sand and gravel production on public lands is not a reason to vote for or against this bill, because quite frankly, the permitting process for things like sand and gravel and construction materials is much easier on private land, rather than to go out predominantly in the West and try to go through this federal land use process. We are importing 100% of our rare earth minerals. You know who we're importing most of them from? I don't say this editorially, just factually. We're importing them from China. The two biggest competitors are China and India. And they're engaging in what some folks call a resource nationalism that says, if you buy these materials from us, you will manufacture in our country too, or we won't export them to you. So when you talk, as Chairman Hastings talked about, things like color television components, flat panel displays, cell phones, DVDs, rechargeable batteries, jet fighter engines, missile guidance systems, anti-missile defense, space-based satellite communication systems, which all include rare earths. And these folks are saying, unless you manufacture those things in our country, we're not going to import them to you, export them to you, then I would submit to you that that's a strategic and critical thing. The final thing I will tell you, and then I would be happy to respond to any additional questions, is this. When we talk about what we're going to do in terms of how strategic and critical is defined, I grant you in this bill it is defined broadly. But when you look at those notions in terms of balance of trade, which is in the bill, doesn't try to hide the ball or anything else like that, and you talk about trying to predict where we're going to be 10 years from now versus 10 years ago, I would submit to you that a broad definition for the timing of the decision on federal land is an appropriate thing. Federal land is not a great place to mine if you've got the option to mine on private land just because of the permitting process. So if, when we hear things like windfalls, doesn't strengthen the workforce, we're selling something, this bill isn't selling anything. It's just telling you you're going to get a decision in a specific time frame, and by the way, those federal land resources which may be economical to mine, for permitting decision purposes, we need a time limit on that. Final point is this. There is nothing in NEPA, which it has evolved to, in my opinion, from a state which is 87% public land, one of the largest gold producers in the world. There is nothing in NEPA that I can find legislative history-wise that says, you know what, the person who wins is the one who can wait the longest for a decision. Nobody here is anti-environment. Those issues are absolutely relevant and should be discussed. But what it has become is a decade-plus process where maybe we can outwait them. The amount of time you're able to wait for a permit should not be the primary factor in whether or not there are environmental issues. If they're there, let's tee them up. If they're prohibitive, fine, make that decision. And if they're not, or they can be mitigated, then let's do that and get it done in that amount of time frame. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you. You know, the question I get most back home is, hey, are the folks in the freshman class able to make a difference? And I think about you, Mr. Amadei. You didn't even get here with the rest of us on day one. You came in a special election halfway through the cycle, and here you are bringing legislation that I know matters to your state, but also matters to the rest of us in the other 49, thinking about growing jobs and providing a way around some of those impediments. Mr. Markey mentioned the mining law of 1872. I'm always inclined to be persuaded by those arguments. I think anything that's been around since 1872 and hasn't been looked at critically deserves a next look. Though I'm also a fan of small bills that do specific things and allow members to really digest that information and make a yes or no decision on something that is germane. Are you working at all in this bill to modify parts of that mining law from 1872? And Mr. Markey is saying you just didn't go far enough?
Well, actually, my colleague from the Bay State, if he's still here, has a point. We need to look at it. And you know what? There have been in previous Congresses, while the gentleman from West Virginia, Chairman Hastings' predecessor, Mr. Rahal, had brought forward. And I think it's a very legitimate issue. But when you talk about gross, taxing somebody on a gross when it's a commodity, in an industry that pays over $75,000 a year for a job, it's like, so you're telling me you're not going to encourage them to provide those, although I don't know where this will end up, those health benefits, those pay benefits, all of the benefits that go with that, those folks, I can assure you, regardless of what state they're working in, are not a drain on public assistance. They can afford homes in their communities. They can pay their bills. They're all drug and alcohol tested. They're not in. So when we talk about let's just do 12% across the board, whether it's gross or net, that's a big issue. When you talk about abandoned mine lands, for instance, Mr. Chairman, in my state, we're very proud of the job that the state of Nevada has done in terms of dealing with that issue and going back and reaching in to those legacy operations 100 years ago when the technology wasn't the same as it was, or even 50 years ago. So should we deal with it? Absolutely. But a one-size-fits-all thing to say, here's what we're going to do. And by the way, when you talk about that tax, what are you going to do with it? I'd like to have that discussion. Because right now, with all due respect, sending 12% of gross or net proceeds into the U.S. Treasury sounds like a bad investment for the taxpayers of every state, in my view. So, yeah, I think it's something we should work on. I'd be happy to work on it, have some notes that I have for my colleague from the Bay State, and look forward to that discussion.
But your bill deals not at all with that tax side, deals only with the permitting side and trying to streamline that process.
Deals only with the time frame for the permitting side. That's correct, which is why it's in natural resources and not ways and means.
I thank you
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
for being here. Ms. Fox?
Well, I want to thank Mr. Amadei for being here also, and I want to echo the comments of my colleague from Georgia. It is so refreshing to have someone come in and explain an issue so succinctly and in terms that people can understand and present such common sense ideas to the Congress. Moving the bureaucracy along and forcing decisions to be made in a reasonable time frame is something we need to be doing a lot more of in this Congress. And I want to applaud you for creating a model here that I think can be used for other places and coming forth and correcting comments that are not accurate that are made to slam legislation, I think is very important also. It's a process, even though you're fairly new, you'll find out we have to do a lot of, not just in this committee, but on the floor, and I welcome hearing the debate on the floor on your piece of legislation. So thank you very much. I have no questions. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. McGovern? Mr. Sessions?
Mr. Amadei, I want you to know that the gentlewoman, Mrs. Fox, took my prepared remarks and gave them all for me. But I concur completely, and I want to thank you for taking time. Not only do I remember when you became probably the 435th member of Congress, what are you down to, about 431 now?
I'm still one up from the anchorman. Thank you, Mr. Sessions.
Oh, you're trying your best. But I want you to know that you coming up to the Rules Committee today is important for us, and that the ideas that you represent are also, and I'm very proud of you. I yield back.
Mr. Hastings?
Mr. Amadei, can you tell me how this measure impacts disposal and storage of mineral waste?
Pardon me, disposal
And storage of mine-related waste?
Well, traditionally, that is the subject of either one of two jurisdictions, either the state jurisdiction in terms of reclamation or also part of the permitting process that the 30 months would allow for. So in terms of NEPA requirements or specific state requirements, it has no impact on them. Its impacts are only on the timelines allowed for federal land use regulators to decide.
So then do you feel that the measure will speed up mineral production in the United States?
Well, I'll tell you what, if the information provided by the ranking member in the subcommittee is accurate, this will provide about 4 or 5 months longer than the administration average to make these. Now, I must tell you in honesty, though, Mr. Hastings, that has not been my experience. So it's data that I would encourage somebody to check, or the need for the bill would seem to be superfluous.
Right.
And so from that perspective, I will tell you that it may speed it up administratively, but I believe you have more experience in the ins and outs of how the litigation process will go, and obviously that's a separate branch of government. While we can provide some guidance, not a lot, all it seeks to do is speed up the decision of whether or not to initiate that process.
So then if I ask how it impacts on the health of men and women who actually go down in the mines, again, I'll turn back to the permitting process and not the fact, if it is true, that black lung is on the increase again and attributable in some respects to a lack of regulation.
Well, and let me make it real clear that to the extent that the Mine Safety Administration and those different federal agencies are not in this bill, it did not go before your Labor and Commerce Committee because we are attempting to do nothing with respect to existing statute or regulation regarding mine safety. This is strictly the land use permitting process.
All right. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bishop?
Amadei, you've received a lot of accolades in this committee so far, and I don't want to extend that to you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Except that Nevada made a good choice when they sent you here, and this is a good example of one of those things to deal with. I appreciate also the commitment you have to making sure that the decisions are made in a timely fashion. It has, since we're going back to old history here, I was an old school teacher, which simply meant you had 9 months to do something. If you didn't do it in 9 months, you didn't do it. And when I came back here, one of the oddities is to find many of the administrative bodies in this talk in terms of, we'll do it in 3-4 years. I need 4 years to study this issue, and at that time I may come up with a decision. If my principal had come to me and said, on Tuesday, you're going to have the standardized tests, and I simply told him, I'm sorry, there is so much we have to cover by Tuesday. We can't possibly do it on Tuesday. Why don't you come back here in 2 years from Tuesday, and we might be ready for it. Decisions can be made in the real world, and decisions need to be made in government. And I appreciate the fact that you're not trying to prejudice which way the decisions go. You're just saying, do your job, and do it in a timely fashion. And honestly, if actually we're going to do something to encourage job creation, especially in the West, where many of these instances are, what you need is certainty. You need an answer. And I appreciate you looking into that and doing something specific, especially on these rare earth minerals that we're talking about in this particular bill. So I appreciate you bringing it to us, and I appreciate your movement going forward to it. Just don't take all of the compliments too seriously, too personally so far.
I'm still fairly scared, Mr. Chairman. Some of you I haven't met before, but I can assure you I'm not enjoying this so far. And as soon as it's over, I'll be pretty happy to be outside in the hall. Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Polis? Mr. Nugent?
Well, as a fellow freshman, congratulations on sitting in that chair, and I really want to comment in regards to your presentation. And I know Dr. Fox hit it. I mean, it was very succinct, very to the point. not a whole lot of argument. So I appreciate it, and I appreciate your brevity.
Mr. Scott? Mr. Webster? Mr. Allen, thank you. You can take that place out in the hall now if you're...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be happy to move there expeditiously.
Ms. Bonamici, you're welcome to take the table. You and I share the two most junior spots on the Budget Committee, and I'm...
As she comes forward, could I just, I had two measures that were amendments as well. When you spoke, you said that she would be last, and I just want you to know that I don't need to make a presentation on mine and ask unanimous consent, or that my remarks be made a part of the record in support of the two amendments that I've offered.
Without objection?
All right, thank you.
Then, we have the two most junior spots there on the Budget Committee. This is your first time here. Welcome to the witness table. Whatever remarks you have there, we'd be happy to make a part of the record. And if you want to provide a summary and take questions, we'd welcome that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for allowing me to testify today in support of the amendment that I'm offering with Congresswoman Waters and Congressman Berman and Moran. Our amendment will prohibit the issuance of new mining permits under H.R. 4402 to anyone found to have not complied with the provisions of the Securities Exchange Act regarding disclosure of the use of conflict minerals from the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the disclosure of payments to foreign governments for extractive industries such as oil and gas. This amendment is critical to ensuring that companies that fail to establish and document a clean mineral supply chain do not benefit from the expedited permit process established under this bill. The provisions requiring the clean mineral supply chain were established in the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. Specifically, two sections, sections 1502 and 1504 of that bill, were included to stop conflict minerals, including conflict gold, tin, and tungsten, from entering the U.S. supply chain. Under those provisions, companies are required to attest to the source of the minerals derived from the Democratic Republic of Congo and neighboring countries, and to document the measures that they have taken to ensure that they're conflict-free. Likewise, companies are required to disclose resource extraction payments to foreign governments. Currently, the Securities and Exchange Commission is promulgating rules to enforce these provisions. A final vote is expected on August 22nd. But those SEC rules will not reach companies that are simultaneously engaging in otherwise lawful mining operations here in the United States, but who have also participated in the deplorable conduct of exploiting workers, including children, in war-torn countries. Trafficking in these conflict minerals supports militia activity in the Democratic Republic of Congo by groups that have routinely used rape and child conscription to achieve their ends. Trade in these mineral resources fuels gender-based and sexual violence in a place that U.S. Special Representative Marco Wallstrom has called the rape capital of the world. It's important to note that the private sector is, for the most part, moving forward on this issue. Intel Corporation, which is the largest private sector employer in my district, has completed on-site reviews of more than 40 smelters worldwide, including examination of the extractives and minerals trade in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Intel has partnered with the State Department and with USAID to establish a public-private alliance for responsible minerals trade. By 2013, Intel aims to have the first verifiably conflict-free microprocessor, and they're proud of that work. So clearly, Intel has found that doing the right thing, being a good corporate world citizen, can also be economically profitable. Failing to include these provisions in H.R. 4402 will undermine our efforts to make the mining industry more transparent and accountable with respect to conflict minerals, and to diminish the link between these minerals and funding of brutal violence carried out by warlords. We cannot and should not permit the United States to be a participant in this grotesque violence by issuing minerals exploration and mining permits to organizations who are known to be in violation of these trafficking provisions. I respectfully request this amendment to H.R. 4402 be made in order under the rule the committee is considering today. Thank you for your consideration, and I'm happy to attempt to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for the amendment. Thank you for being here, Mr. Sessions.
I have no questions.
Mr. McGovern.
No, I want to thank you for this important amendment, and I want to thank you, which I certainly support. I want to thank you for your commitment to human rights, because this is a very, very important matter, and I hope that this committee will make your amendment in order. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern.
Ms. Fox.
I don't have any questions, but thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Hastings.
I want to laud Ms. Bonaventure as being a freshman and having put forward a succinct analysis of the amendments that she offered, and show how grateful we are that you're here.
Thank you.
And I support your amendment.
Thank you.
Mr. Bishop.
Thank you.
Mr. Polis.
I just want to thank the gentlelady from Oregon for presenting before our committee, and hopefully it'll be made in order, and I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Mr. Nugent.
Congratulations to another freshman. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Scott.
Mr. Hastings said. I told us sincerely and
Mr. Webster. Ms. Bonamici, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your consideration.
Yeah. Mr. Hastings, I want to make sure we don't move on without, did that take care of all of your? All right. Okay. The hearing portion of the meeting on H.R. 4402 is now closed. I would tell.
Mr. Chairman, do we get to congratulate Mr. Hastings on his succinct presentation on his amendments?
I like, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to second that.
I would like to
There's not a freshman in the House that could have done it better, Mr. Hastings, and I appreciate that. I'm hopeful that we will be able to report a rule in short order, but until that time, the committee stands in recess. I would expect that recess to last until 3:45.
Rules Committee will reconvene. We're here for further consideration of H.R. 4402. Chair will be in receipt of a motion. The gentleman from Dallas. Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 4402, the National Strategic and Critical Minerals Production Act 2012 structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour general debate equal divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member on the Committee on Natural Resources. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. Rule makes an order as original text for a purpose of amendment. The amendment in the nature of substitute consists of the text of Rules Committee Print 112-26 and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against the amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those amendments printed in the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, and shall be considered as read. Shall be debatable for time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against amendments printed in the report. Finally, the rule provides 1 motion recommit with or without instructions. You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Let me just explain very briefly here. We had 11 amendments submitted, 1 was withdrawn, so we had 10 amendments pending, and we've made an order 5 Democratic amendments, 2 Republican amendments, total of 7 amendments. We cover virtually all of the issues that have been submitted before the committee, and so I think that, again, we have made by 2 to 1 plus 1 more Democratic amendments in order than Republican amendments, and so I think that should be very fair. Are there any amendments to the rule?
Yeah, oh, yes.
Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, I have an amendment to the rule. I move that the committee grant H.R. 4402 an open rule so that all members have the opportunity to offer amendments to the bill on the floor. I just say, Mr. Chairman, all the amendments being blocked, to the best of my knowledge, are germane. They do not violate any rule of the House. If we had an open rule, these members can all come to the floor and get a vote on their ideas, and then maybe some who hear the debate may want to offer amendments. So I'd ask my colleagues to support my amendment. So
As I said, we've covered virtually all the issues, the amendments that were submitted to us, and I urge a no vote. The vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Pay the chair the noes. Have it.
Roll call.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. No. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. No. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter. Aye. Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Mr. Clerk, the total?
4 yeas, 8 nays.
Any amendments not agreed to? There further amendments? Mr. McGovern.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to the rule. I move that the committee make an order and give the necessary waivers for the amendment by Representatives Bonamici, Waters, Berman, and Jim Moran, number 8, which would deny mining permits to people who violate the laws about trafficking in conflict minerals. We just heard from Ms. Bonamici, you weren't here, but she gave a very compelling testimony. This is a human rights issue, and it's germane, it's an order. It's just hard for me to believe that this committee wouldn't see fit to allow this to be debated on the floor and for members to have an up or down vote. I think there'd be broad bipartisan support. There's really no reason why this shouldn't be made in order. I hope my colleagues will vote yes on this.
Thank you very much. Vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair the noes. Have it. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, no. Ms. Fox. No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Scott. No. Mr. Scott, no. Mr. Webster. No. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Slaughter. Aye. Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings. Aye. Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk, the total?
4 yeas, 8 nays.
Amendments not agreed to. There further amendments? If not, the vote occurs on the motion of the gentleman from Dallas. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no.
Aye.
The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. And Mr. Bishop will be managing this rule for the majority.
And Mr. Polis.
And Mr. Polis for the minority. That should be it for the week. And we hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the week. And without
Mr. Chair?
Sure, Mr. Polis.
On behalf of the minority members, we would like to wish the chair a happy birthday this
Well, that's
week.
ancient history.
What's that?
That's ancient history. I mean,
Happy birthday.
although I will admit that I celebrate my birthday the month before and the month after, so.
Oh.
So in light of that, it is my birthday. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman?
Thank you. Yes.
There was a
Hi.
very nice article in the paper about you yesterday. I
Really?
brought it with
What's
me,
that? Uh-oh.
and I want to
Want me to autograph
congratulate
it
you.
for you? I haven't
about-
seen it, but, you know.
About your push for democracy in
Oh,
other
thank you.
countries, and I thought it was a very nice article.
Thank you very, very much. Okay. Now, without objection, the committee stands adjourned. Unless Ms. Slaughter wants to wish me a happy birthday.